Good morning to everybody. By Florence standard, this is very cold morning. The traditional wisdom for decades and decades in the process of European integration has been that the process and the Union thrives on crises. I remember 6 or 7 years ago, I hosted the then President of the Council, Van Rompuy, in New York. It was just the beginning of the financial crisis. And he said, this is good for Europe because you will see this is what will push us to the next stage of European integration. And historically, there's a lot of truth in that Europe has thrived on crisis. And because very often in crisis, the most effective solution was to move ahead with the process of integration as a solution to the problem. But I think both the Euro crisis and the current migration crisis have demolished that thesis, which is not to say that good things cannot come back, but what it does say is that you can't wait for the next crisis in order to go to the next step or to readjust your strategies or your thinking or the political process of the Union. The fallout is not only in the immediate sense, but as we know, also in popular perceptions, in popular and elite legitimacy, etc. And one of the things that it highlights is that there's often been a shortage. The culture of crisis means short-term solutionism. And there has been a shortage of medium and long-term serious reflection, research, exploration, and strategic thinking. This conference is not the European University Institutes scrambling to get into the game. There's a migration crisis in Europe. Our voice has to be heard. Already several years ago, we started this forum, and we, both in the definition of the forum and the definition of the objectives of the forum, we are steadfast in our self-understanding that we are not exactly the kind of think tank that you have a problem today and we produce a position paper for tomorrow, but that our strength as a research institution with a policy-oriented Robert Schuman Center is in our medium and long-term research, reflection, policy recommendation on the fundamental issues in a fundamental way. And that's why when we started this forum, of which this event today is one of its manifestations, one of its instances, we defined the cluster, not we have a problem of migration, but from the very start, it was demography, migration, and citizenship. Because we understood that there's an inevitable connection, both in terms of understanding the forces that shape what is going on and the concepts that should inform serious reflection, not on stopgap solutions, but on long-term ways of dealing with challenges as interconnection between these three concepts. Demography is fundamental in thinking of the future of Europe, not just in terms of the raw numbers, but also the demographic balances, the intergenerational balances, etc. And one doesn't have to be Albert Einstein to see the connection between the demographic projection, prospects, challenges of Europe, and the issue of movement of people and migration in that connection. And what to some is a little bit less obvious, but to us is a fundamental tenet of how we have structured our thinking, comes in citizenship, because citizenship is a proxy of how you socially integrate societies, not just who's going to get whom and how many and how to distribute and how to stop and how to encourage, etc. But when you have these kind of movements of people, how are they to be accepted? What are their challenges to integration of people into European societies, into the European society? Hence the forum on demography, migration, and citizenship. What we're looking forward in these 2 days, where the focus is on demography, in connection with migration, it's we building on our strength. You all know of the work in the Robert Schuman Center, Philippe, Fargues, and others working in that context. And again, our hope is to find a good balance between serious fundamental research and reflection, but a reflection that is relevant for the policymaker in thinking about not just tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, or even the week or the year after tomorrow. Now I have to say something that is banal and always pains me to say. When I came to the Institute, I said, in my soul I'm a professor, I will remain a professor. I give seminars, I supervise doctoral students, but I have a sideline, a moonlighting job, which is called being president of the European University Institute, which I also have to do in addition to being a professor, and it means that I apologize that I will not be able to be with you throughout the whole 2 days. If you see me walk out, it's not because I'm bored. I walk out with sorrow that I cannot be for the whole proceedings. I wish us 2 very, very productive days. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'll begin by introducing myself. I'm Brigid, Laffan, Director of the Robert Schuman Center, which is, as the President said, we are the interdisciplinary platform and the policy forum within the European University Institute. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the headquarters of the Schuman Center here in the beautiful Villa Laffan. It is a wonderful place to spend 2 days. I hope that the weather ensures that you also get to see the garden at some stage. This is the first of our thematic forums. We began the Forum on Migration, Citizenship and Demography with a broad brush of all of the big questions and all of the big issues, and then we have now decided to move to look thematically at a number of particular themes and problems. And it's appropriate that we begin with population, because demographic change is core, central to the big mobilities that we see. Core to the push factors and core to the pull factors. We have a world in which the rich world has aging populations and lengthening life expectancy, and a poor world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, which is still too poor to have experienced the demographic dividend that you see through processes of economic and social development. There are very big implications for Europe and for our neighbourhood in these demographic changes. We must ask, how good is our data? How sound are our predictions? What can we say as scholars of population movement that will help begin to understand what the medium and long-term implications are? How prepared is this part of the world for those changing demographic realities? What are the implications for our societies, for the way we govern ourselves, for our welfare systems, and for our labour markets? And I think we also need to think through some of the tricky issues. One that's not on the program, but I think we do need to take seriously, is if you have a gender imbalance in mobility, what are the consequences of very significant gender imbalances in movements of people? These are all tricky and difficult questions, but ones that we have to address. And as the President said, our purpose is to look to the medium and long term. But of course, we're conscious that in looking to the medium and long term, we're doing it in an environment where these are real and pressing issues. I'd like to particularly thank the Director of the Migration Policy Centre, my colleague Professor Philippe Fargues, who, when asked to put together a programme on demography, and of course he is a demographer, he put together this 2 days, which is very comprehensive and brought together all of you, such a rich programme and a wonderful group of people. So thank you to Philippe for doing this. Thank you all for being with us over the 2 days, and I look forward very much to our discussion. You're all very welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. A warm welcome here. I'm very happy to welcome you for this forum on demography. I'm also happy to welcome demography at the EUI because I think, to the best of my knowledge, it is the first event on demography at the EUI. So I'm extremely happy with this. Our program will be to reflect on the future of Europe, on the near future, probably more than on the very, very long range projections. And I'm just going not to repeat what is in the description of this session, but to say a few words about our meeting in these 2 days and the way we are going to organize it. So we have four, sorry, well, it's winter now. We have 4 sessions. And there is a kind of logic in the structure of these 4 sessions. The first session will be on Europe's demographic future. So we are going to look at the projections, and we are going not only to look at the numbers, but at the distribution of these numbers according to important categories, in particular generations, as is what it was mentioned by Joseph Weiler. We are also going in that first session to pay a particular interest into the process of aging. Aging, we are going to look at aging from an individual and from a population point of view, and we are going to try to understand what are the ramifications of this process in terms not only of welfare, but also in terms of achievements of our economies and societies in Europe. So that will be our first session. The second session will introduce migration in demography. So what is the role of migration, of population movements in the reproduction of population in general? And what is in particular, we are going to have a reflection to revisit an old concept that was introduced by the United Nations now 15 years ago, the concept of replacement migration. If we identify that in our populations a number of people are missing, then can migrants replace these people? And I'm very happy that we have here a colleague from the population division of the UN to also discuss this idea of replacement migration. We are going also to have a particular focus on what is becoming the dominant form of migration today, which is family reunification. Migration is certainly the big crisis we have with refugee movements. It is certainly also the movement of workers, but it is mainly in terms of numbers, family members of previous migrants who are rejoining their family in Europe. So we are going to have a reflection on this. And I think we are going also to have to leave a little bit demography and to look at legislations, to look at the policy framework in Europe. Is it adapted to what are the challenges? And in particular, is the migration policy framework responding to demographic needs that we are going to discuss? Our third session will be on migration in the world, because Europe is not the only part of the world with migrants. Migration is everywhere in the world, and Europe is not the only part of the world with a big refugee crisis. Other parts of the world had bigger refugee crises. And I'm extremely happy that we are going to be able to compare Europe today, the 28 member states of the European Union, with one state that had probably even bigger mass movements of refugees. I'm talking about Iran. So what are the lessons we can draw from what happened in Iran now a few years or decades ago in terms of, and again, focusing on demography, focusing on integrating people who are forced migrants coming from either the other side of the border or further away. We are also going to have a look at Africa. Africa is important for Europe, of course, because Africa is our closest neighbor. Africa is important for the world because Africa's demography is today and for decades the most dynamic, if I would say, demography in terms of population growth. And there is clearly, obviously, in Africa, a development challenge, a fertility challenge that we are going to discuss. I would also like that our discussion can imagine what will be the future of Africa in terms of migration. We are very often say that Africa has international migration, but that international migration is intracontinental migration. That is true. That was not always the case, as we all know. That has been the case for the last century after the slave trade, but it was not the case before. And we don't know, after all, if it will continue to be the case, because we can see that the reluctance to let people in, to let people cross borders that we observe today in Europe very much, that reluctance that was not at all typical of Africa is emerging, I would say, in Africa today. Nation states with anthems, with borders, with flags, etc., are very much present in Africa today. So what is the future of migration in Africa will also be something important. We are also going to talk in this session on migration in the world about a neglected aspect of migration, but I think which is important, that migrants are people who come to countries that are different from their own, that are culturally different, and in these countries they are exposed to norms, models of behaviors that they are re-exporting to their countries of origin. So the so-called social or ideational remittances should really become an important topic, because migrants may contribute to the cultural understanding of the world. So we are going also to discuss this aspect in our third session. And the last session, the fourth session, will be on migration into Europe, migration towards the European Union. So we are going then to look at numbers, to look at projections, to look at methods. So it will be important also to have a look at the structure of this population and to understand what migrants' contribution to the progress of our economies, in particular through innovation, the contribution of migrants to our knowledge-based economy can be important or not. So that is a question that is open. And then, finally, we're going to look at the sociological makeup, because migrants, obviously, have an impact on the society that they join. And that impact can be important in cultural terms. Cultures are not fixed once for good. They are changing, and migration is a factor of change in this. So we are going to reflect on whether migration creates two populations or one new population out of two different populations at the beginning. So this is exactly what we are going to have during these 2 days. I would like also that, of course, we are an academic institution, we are a research institution, and we have to have sound reflection. We have to have academic robustness. But we are weighted at the corner by politicians also, and we need to be able to talk to politicians. And I think it would be good to leave these 2 days not with recommendations, but with an idea of how the way we have to think about migration can be useful in terms that are policy relevant. Because we are witnessing today a real chaos in Europe. It's absolutely incredible what's happening at EU level and at member states level. So, of course, we are academics, but I think we also need to use what we know in order to help politicians to have a better vision, I think, of the world in which we live today, which is not a world limited at the borders of Europe. So thank you for this. So we are now going to start, I think, our first session, which will be on Europe's demographic future. So I would like to invite our speakers here